today's episode, I interview Ben Bromhead, co-founder of Instaclustr. Instaclustr is a data management company for big tech firms all around the world, and founded in 2012 with Ben alongside three other co-founders. And they raised a company from bootstrap, a startup, all the way to a successful international tech firm that employs over 200 people. They've recently actually, the firm was acquired for over $500 million by a large US-based data firm. And it was really great to hear Ben's insights into what it took to start the business, the importance of pivoting at the right times and moving forward and getting feedback as quickly as possible. Hope you enjoy the show and feel free to review and share with family and friends. Ben, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much. It's absolutely awesome to be here and to be chatting to another Aussie about this stuff. It's great.
Yeah, we see you've been on quite the journey over the last few years, and tell us a little bit about your background and sort of how you got into tech and also business. I guess often they're two competing sort of ideas, but tell us a little bit about how you started.
Yeah, so how I got into tech, I don't know. I think as a little kid, I've always been fascinated, with the way that stuff works. Even as a young fellow, I was always kind of, pulling apart old clock radios to figure out how they work and, all that stuff. I don't think I ever did figure out how they worked, but I certainly love to see, all the bits and pieces that kind of
the inner workings.
Exactly. And, that progressed pretty quickly on when my old man got the family computer. And, I then very quickly discovered video games, right? I think that's kind of the gateway drug for most, software engineers or developers.
Yeah.
And, I've been really, really interested in that side of things as well. And then on the business side of it, I've always been really fascinated with, I guess, discovering or finding things that are, I guess, a little bit of a shortcut for just, say, showing up and doing a 9 to 5, right?
Yeah.
I've been really, really fascinated in business, both from the side of, building a business where people are, like the product that you make. But I've also been very interested in, say, like, the world of finance and watching how people, trade, shares or options or derivatives or whatever that is, to kind of get a little bit of an upper hand. So all that side of things has always fascinated me. I have to say I've always been better at the technology side of that than necessarily that side of it.
Well, they don't always go hand in hand, do they, in terms of interest? Often you get the tech side, and that's a real interest, but and sometimes obviously across to the business side, but not necessarily into the finance side like you're talking. You're talking sort of more into an understanding or an interest in that side, which is not always, which should be an incredible advantage as you go along, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think that a little bit of that kind of came about because I eventually landed in cybersecurity. That was kind of the first area of technology that I kind of worked in. And so in my position there, and I worked for a company called StratSec, which later got acquired by BAE Systems. And there I did a lot of, vulnerability testing, penetration testing, also ran a high assurance cryptography lab there as well. And, what I really enjoyed about that was, yes, you kind of, get to work with technology and, code up stuff, but also it allows you to build a really great understanding of the rules of a system, right? How it works, how people expect it to work, the people side of that system, the IT side of that system, the way that processes work. And then it's your job to go out and exploit that, right?
Yeah.
And, so getting a really great understanding of, like, the rules of a system and then figuring out how you can kind of get an edge.
You're digging into the integrity of the system, right? What underpins how it works and why it works, and trust and all those sorts of things that go into that type of thing that we take for granted in many respects.
Yeah, and when you take that framework and then you start to look at, like, business problems or how can we make a better product, right? I've always really enjoyed that hacker mentality of, like, well, do we have to do things the way that we've always kind of done it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really kind of married up the two interests that I've had both on the business side and the technology side. Is really that hacker mentality, right?
Yeah.
And so from first start into tech, how did that all come about? Or was it just something you're always going to do?
Honestly, it was always something that I was kind of do, going to do. I took as many programming classes as I could in high school. I even, changed from, the private school in Canberra that I was going to a public high school because they offered a better, computer program as well than what was currently on offer. So that was kind of the direction I headed. And then, I kind of got the opportunity to go work at StratSec. Luckily one of the guys that was running that was also my uncle, and I was constantly bugging him for a job since I think about the age of 12. And it only took him about 7 or 8 years from that point to finally say yes.
So he saw your potential early.
Well, maybe the persistence. I don't know about potential, but persistence was certainly there. But yeah, no, and that was kind of the first real wicket that I got, right? And that was super enjoyable.
And what about as you go through that process into starting the business? Intercluster and any sort of iterations before that type of thing?
Yeah, no, I think so. So I worked in StratSec, the cybersecurity company, for about 5 years.
Yep.
And that got acquired by BAE Systems, and that was the first taste I really sort of like how building a great company can have a great outcome, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so, I kind of, and I'd also kind of, I think, got to a bit of a point in my career and, what I was doing, that I was kind of I was getting sick of breaking things and I wanted to go build something, right?
Yeah, right. Yep.
And so a few of those things kind of all combined, and I decided to take about 6 months off from working, and I kind of ostensibly told everyone that I was going to, just work full time at uni and finish off my degree. And I think I did that for about a term, but then I very quickly decided to start working on a startup. And we started working on a company completely kind of different called Relational IO. And the concept around that was kind of like taking, building a marketplace for high value data sets, right? So whether it's financial information, consumer information, whatever that might be. But the way that we provide that is very much in a data warehousey kind of way. So lots of unified schemas, easy for people to use. It just kind of made, the people that have to use that data, it made their life a lot easier.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, it was a big, hard problem. Like one, trying to build a marketplace, you kind of got to find the sellers as well as the buyers.
Yeah, right. Two-sided. Yeah.
And, I was also 25 at the time. I didn't really quite have what I'd call the business skills or the sales skills to go out and kind of do that dual role, particularly in a B2B marketplace setting.
Yeah.
But anyway, throughout that process of building that out and that capability, we very quickly struck across this need for a particular database called Apache Cassandra, right? Now, this was a really cool database. It came out of Facebook. It was very much, it could scale out to, massive sizes, someone like Facebook would kind of need.
Yeah.
But we started to see a lot of other people adopting it, and we also had a use case for it too, but it was just really, really hard to run, right? And we had to spend a bunch of time, writing code and scripts and other bits and pieces to get it running, right? And there was one point where me and my other co-founder at the time, Adam, we kind of looked at each other and we kind of thought, hey, other people might be interested in this. So we kind of took everything that we built just to kind of get it up and running for this relational IO concept. And, we slapped in front of it a little web console, some credit card billing, wrote a little blog post about it and kind of pushed it off into the world. And about 3 months later, we had 5 production customers running on it, and we'd made more money in that 3 months than we ever had on the other idea. And, that was kind of the first strong bite that we'd kind of built something that people were actually interested in and that had a good fit with what they needed.
And did you see that was had that potential at that stage, or were you still focused on the other side of what you were doing more so? Or at what point was that 3 month mark where the reality hits and it's like, hang on?
I think that was the signal that I think we should spend more time on it. I would love to say that, we had the utmost clarity about what was going on, but that was definitely not the case. And we kind of worked on both ideas side by side for about 8 or 9 months.
Okay.
But it, you know, even after that, it very quickly appeared that, look, hey, this, you know,
Yeah.
Cassandra-based thing, we hadn't really came up with a name for it yet. It eventually became Instacluster. That was kind of that was the one. But I think again we kind of had one foot in the other, and you know, it's funny. I think I wish, going back, that, you know, we kind of had a bit more of the guts to just go, hey, this has got the big hit, let's just go hard on it from day one, right?
Yeah. You never know, right? And that's part of the experimenting and the trial and error. That's how it goes. So you've got to earn your stripes on both sides, and you never know if you took that view to start with, you might never have started the other side.
Exactly. And I think it was also a great lesson in, you know, emotional attachment to things that you build.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think you got to be excited about the big picture stuff, but you really can't be too attached to the implementation or how you go about it. Right. And I think part of why we kind of did a bit of both, you know, it was like, that was the original idea. That's what we built and promised. Right. But anyway,
that's such a fine line though, between being relentless and never giving in, and being impractical and hard-headed and not listening to what's actually happening. It is a really fine line, because all the sort of the stories and anecdotes you hear around about, you know, don't give in and you eventually succeed and all those types of things. So it is counterintuitive somewhat to like you say, give up on, not give, that's the wrong word, but you understand what I'm saying in terms of ceasing on to pursue something that you can see there's a better opportunity.
Yeah, I think, and it's about what level you choose to do it at, right? You know, because what's interesting is what we built with Instaclustr and what we were previously working on, right? You know, they both were kind of very much the premise of, you know, hey, big data, it's here to stay, and, you know, people are just going to generate more and more data, and it's always a challenge for organizations to work with it, right? You know, so those two axioms really hold true for both businesses, right? And I think we very much stayed true to, hey, we want to do something in this space that makes it easier for people to deal with the volume of data, right? Where you got to be flexible is when it comes to execution and listening to what the market's telling you, right? And the market tells you with what they spend money on, right? So you got to follow that one. Yeah.
And as you start the business, in terms of your strengths and weaknesses as you build Instaclustr, and you've got your co-founder as well, what were the sort of the biggest strengths that you brought to the table, and how does that help you succeed in business?
Yeah, so well, I think so. First of all, so it was myself and Adam, my other technical co-founder at the time, and we kind of worked on it for a little bit, and then we brought on Doug Stewart and Peter Lilly, and they were actually the two guys that ran StratSec, right? And so we kind of initially brought them on as kind of you know, seed or hatch funding kind of investors. But, you know, thinking about what are the strengths and weaknesses that I kind of brought, particularly at that time, you know, we really needed people that, one, knew how to operate a business just on the day-to-day side of things, right? And both Pete and Doug really stepped up, and they actually joined full-time as kind of like founders in that regard, right? So we kind of, once we'd kind of, I think, gotten onto Instaclustr and started to see that, hey, there's actually some great product fit and people are responding to that. That was when it's like, hey, we need to start really, you know, skilling up the team, right? And, you know, one of the things that I've always kind of seen my job as a founder, right, in growing a business, not just, you know, starting it and finding where you've got some good product fit, market fit, right? When you're growing a business, like my number one job as a founder is actually to put myself out of a job, right? You know, I'll step up to the plate and go do everything and do anything, right? Where, you know, whether it's cleaning the kitchen or jumping on a sales call or, you know, talking to the accountant or, you know, working out our SEO strategy, right? Look, I'll go jump in and give everything of those a go. But I'm not an expert in all of those, right? And, you know, I want to do those things where it makes sense. Where, because I've got a great understanding of, you know, the product or the market or whatever, like I can get in and give it a go. But, you know, I should always be working to put myself out of a job, right? Because one, that means we're growing, and that function that I'm working on is important enough that we need to put more resources towards it. But also someone's going to go do a better job than I will, right? So I think, you know, probably one of the strengths, and this will sound a bit counterintuitive, is, you know, that I'm quite proud of, is that it's pretty easy for me to leave my ego at the door, right? And you know, I know the time when it's me, get out of the seat, put someone who knows what they're doing in it, let them run, and I can jump on to the next thing.
But I think that is counterintuitive for a lot of people, right? Because you've got to be, like you say, leave your ego at the door. You can't have, you know, you can't be a control freak and have that outcome. It just comes to a point where you've just got to let go and move out, and let other people grow into those sorts of roles or replace yourself, like you say. And that's how the business becomes sustainable, and you can build on it from there, right? Because then you're doing other things, whatever it needs to be that you do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think, you know, there's certainly stories in the business world, right, of people who've built amazing companies, and, you know, they might be a control freak around certain elements. You know, think about Steve Jobs, right? You know, used to obsess about the details and color, and, you know, but I think, you know, he did really well, but that's because of who he is, and he's the exception to the rule, right? There's only one Apple.
In spite of those traits that they were successful, not because of, and I think that's probably destroyed dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of businesses.
Exactly. Right? You can do that if you're Steve Jobs. If you're not, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And in terms of, you got 4 people basically come into that business in an relatively early stage. What year is that roughly, Ben?
Yeah, that's kind of like 2012, 2013, roughly. Yeah.
And so that's often you've got 2 co-founders, but here you've effectively got 4 people with different strengths, and presumably with the other 2 guys that came in from the other business, they've been through that whole process from start to finish, right? Which is a massive advantage in many respects. So was that something where, from a weaknesses point of view, or just aspects that aren't your strength, you've got other people already in the mix that, you know, between 4 of you just about cover everything you need to cover? Or did you find there were other aspects that you really, between you, needed to cover off on?
Yeah, look, there was certainly stuff that we needed to cover off on later on in our journey, right? But, you know, that team was pretty solid for, you know, the first 3 or 4 years, right? And, you know, we, after the first couple of years, you know, we brought in someone to really help grow and manage our engineering team, right? And, you know, then once we kind of like got our first, I guess, seed round from a proper institutional investor, you know, we used that to go across to the US, set up a US presence. And it was at about that time that we hired a US based CEO, right? You know, all of us, you know, great technologists. Obviously, Pete and Doug had, you know, grown and sold a business, but it was a consulting business, right? Whereas what we were building was very much a B2B sales and, you know, developer marketing kind of style business, right? So we all kind of knew that we needed to level up there. We knew we needed to have someone on the ground in the US, right? You know, 70% of our customers are US based.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And so that's kind of where we made a bit of a level up. And then, you know, but those kind of 2 key hires kind of lasted us for a while. And, you know, it was only in the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years now, that we, you know, made key hires around, you know, someone who heads up marketing or someone who heads up sales, right? So yeah, I think we managed to have a pretty good run with the team that we kind of brought, so to speak.
Yeah, and in terms of making the decision to have a US based CEO, and like you say, customers, 70% of your customers are US based. Is that obviously you'd make the same decisions again, and the focus for US, would you have done that earlier, or in hindsight, I'm talking?
I mean, look, I mean, it's funny. We always, you know, the 4 of us always love to sit around and go, oh man, if we could start this business 10 years ago with everything that we know, right? How great would that be, right? All the mistakes you wouldn't make, and all the, you know, shortcuts you'd take. But I think given everything that we kind of knew, I think we got to the US about as quickly as we could. You know, I kind of wish we jumped harder on, you know, just single focus on Instaclustr maybe a little bit earlier on. I think that would have, you know, could have helped us out a bit. You know, I think getting to the US, we did that as quickly as we could. You know, I think there's always some missteps that you make when it comes to marketing and positioning and messaging, right? But from everything that I've read and everyone that I've talked to, that's actually just part of the education and the discovery process, right? No one ever knocks it out of the park first time, and it's actually about that process and that feedback cycle, and kind of tightening that as short as you can until you kind of hit on something that really works. So you always look back on those spent cycles and you go, oh, I wish we kind of found the thing that works a little bit earlier. But actually going through that process, that's what gets you to the thing that works.
Yeah,
right?
that's the learning process, right? You go through the process and you work it out. That's not just even with business, that's with just about everything.
Right.
Whether it's parenting or life, or it doesn't matter. You look back at things and go, oh, if I hadn't have spent how many years doing that and then worked out that, or if I'd have done whatever else, there's always that. There's always that sort of issue, but that's the joys of the journey, right?
It is, and you know what they say, you always find something in the last place you look.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's true. In terms of the business, what's sort of next for the business? You've raised money through the process. I read an article on in the Financial Review that you guys might have been exiting. I don't know if that's
So
you've proceeded with that, or
so that that actually just closed on the 27th of May.
Okay.
So a few weeks ago. So
right.
So we're now a part of NetApp, which is a big US company, really exciting company to kind of be part of. And
congratulations, mate. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Well, I saw the note, but I didn't know it was the update. So that's
great. No. It only just happened a few weeks ago, right? And the big announcement is when they announced the intent, right, to acquire. That's kind of the big
yeah.
And then the rest is just due diligence and closing the transaction, blah blah blah, right? So yeah, no, we're now part of that team. I'm super excited about the journey going forward. I really like the vision that they've built and that they came to us with. It really kind of fitted the way that we look at the world. A lot of the what they kind of thought and saw in the market, we really thought and saw. And now we get to go tackle that opportunity with the full might of a 13,000 employee organization and behind us and everything there. So super excited about the future there.
And that part of it is really about, in terms of, rather than is it part exit, and some of this might be confidential, of course, but is it part exit, or is it basically they're accelerating you what you can do now with the, like you say, with the power behind you from them, it lets you accelerate what you would otherwise have taken more time to do.
Yeah. So look, they now fully own Instaclustr, and I'm a happy employee under their banner. But we chose to kind of go with them because of the vision they had for the product, because they saw it as a large tentpole in part of their strategy around cloud. So that was kind of the right place, right? So I do enjoy the technology space that we're in, so I'm kind of really excited about what's next on that journey, even though my name isn't on the share certificate anymore.
But that's awesome to go through that full cycle, right? And get to enjoy the fruits of your labor in many respects as well, and go through that whole process, because it's not all the time that it works out in that way. So to do that and have it result in a great acquisition or exit, it's fantastic.
No, super excited. And look, this will also be the first time that I've ever worked for an organization that had more than, Instaclustr very quickly became the biggest organization I'd ever worked for. And so now we're here a few more orders of magnitude. So I'm also excited about kind of learning the ropes there. And it should be good.
No, that's good, mate. Excellent. And in terms of what advice would you give to someone starting in business now, knowing all the things like you say that now? What would be the number one bit of advice you give somebody?
The number one bit of advice is, I don't know, there's so many lessons I've learned over the course of 10 years, so many scars. Honestly, I think the biggest one is really to get feedback as quickly as possible, right? And
Yeah.
you know, I mean, feedback from the people that are going to buy it, right? You know, it's all
Yeah,
great
right.
to, you know, look, I had my mum tell me it was a great idea too, right? But
Yeah.
she hasn't paid me a single buck,
Yeah,
right,
right.
through the business.
Unreliable feedback.
You know, so it's all about, you know, getting that feedback from who your potential customer base is going to be, who you think it is, iterating as quickly as possible, right? So whether that's, you know, calling people and asking what they think or what their problems or what their challenges are, you know, building mock-ups and putting that in front of people. And, you know, quite often I see, particularly, you know, particularly like in Australian startups, I think less so now, but certainly, you know, a little while in the past, you know, people are quite timid about that. They're worried about, well, if I go and talk to this person and it's not ready, well, that's a sale that I've lost because then they'll never talk to me again, right?
Yeah, right.
Or, you know, they're quite timid and they go, oh, we'll only maybe limit ourselves just to say the Australian market. We'll prove things out here before we kind of go bigger, right? You know, you actually want to be talking to as many people as you can in as many markets as you can, or particularly your biggest one, which, you know, 90% of the time it's going to be the US, right? And just getting that feedback as quickly as possible. And just remember that, you know, those people you talk to, right? Like, you know, they're not going to look at the half-baked ideas you put in front of them and go, well, I'll never do business with them again. They'll see you on that journey, right? And they'll see your passion behind it. They'll know that you're working on a problem, that you're listening to their feedback, right? And so when you finally do reach out and touch base with them and you've got something that they're like, hey, actually, this is now something I'm happy to take a risk on. And I've seen the process, I've seen the journey.
They'll see your growth, right? That's what they're exactly right.
Exactly. So I think, you know, the number one bit of advice is just to get out, put yourself out there as quickly as possible, get that feedback, and don't restrict yourself.
Do you see a difference between Australian founders sometimes and US founders from a cultural perspective? With when you talk about sometimes people can be a bit timid, do you see a difference with that, or is it just people across the board, perhaps?
There's definitely, you know, there's a spectrum like for both sides of the ditch. Don't get me wrong. Like, you know, you'll be able to find a US founder who is timid, right? And you'll be able to find an Australian one who's outspoken, right? Don't get me wrong. But by far and large, you know, Americans are really great at talking about things, talking about themselves, talking about the company they built, the vision, right? They're really great at pitching that, and it's going to be bigger than Ben-Hur, and that's great, right? When you're trying to drive a bit of velocity, drum up business, get people excited, right? On the flip side, like, you know, Australians tend to be a little bit more reserved. They tend to be a little bit more maybe, you know, very good at vision and that kind of thing, but still downplaying things. That can also be a benefit as well, because it's great at building trust, right? You know, and so there's certain areas or arenas where that is actually such a huge thing, right? When you talk honestly about your product, the limitations, how you're approaching it, you know, particularly in high value B2B sales, right? That actually can build massive amounts of trust, right? Look, still go in there and have confidence. But when you can kind of have an honest, no BS kind of conversation, that can also be a real asset as well, right?
But there's a difference between being confident and timid, right? So if you're talking about people being timid, they, you know, almost to be successful, you have to get over that part. Even if you're not necessarily extroverted, you have to still be confident, not timid. You have to put yourself out there, and whatever comes, whatever happens, and you just keep on moving, right?
Yeah, spot on, right? But yeah, definitely, I think, you know, we all know, you know, the Yanks are pretty good at talking a good game, right? And I think we can always learn a little something from that when we're out there trying to build a business.
Yeah. And in terms of people who are sort of those founders and other people in business that are successful, is there anyone that comes to mind that, you know, whether it's a mentor or whether it's just another business person that you look at and admire the way they go about it? Is there anyone that
look, I'm certainly like a huge fan of you know, my two co-founders, Doug and Pete. You know, I certainly looked up to them as business founders and managers, and, you know, really admire the way that they work. Outside of that, you know, I'm also, you know, my grandfather was an accountant. He kind of, you know, he was a shoe salesman in Randwick and put himself through night school to become an accountant, and kind of built it all up for himself. And you know, just you know, a bit of a different approach, and it was an accountant's practice and all that. But you know, I think he's kind of the one that's always, you know, even when I was quite young, talked about, you know, business and other bits and pieces with me as well. So yeah, no, I certainly always looked up to him. I don't know. I've always found I've been lucky to be surrounded by people that are quite, you know, literate or fluent in this kind of stuff. So I haven't had to look quite far afield. And I think knowing them and who they are and their personalities, and, you know, also like you can just be a regular human person with all your, you know, your flaws and your strengths and that kind of stuff, and still go off and do really awesome things, rather than necessarily, you know, lionizing these people that you see in the media. I think I've been really, really lucky to kind of have some of those people in my life, for sure.
Yeah, that's so important though, and it's under appreciated, I think, in society, is like you say, just being able to see people in your family who have done something.
It's huge,
because then that's very possible. Then it's not like, you know, you've got to look at someone who's famous and rich and all that type of thing. I mean, sure, that's often a source of inspiration, but being able to see someone who in your family got up every day and did the hard work, and you see what that translates into over years. I mean, I look at my own dad. You know, we grew up in country WA, and my dad was one of 11 kids, Italian family, and he grew up, left school at 15, 16, had an earth moving, or started driving what's called a backhoe, like an excavator type thing, and started a business, and, you know, up every day at 6 o'clock and come home every night at 6 o'clock, and, you know, working all the time. And you see that over the years, that hard work translates into a business, and it translates into providing for your family and all those little things that you just see, the foundations of it, right?
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it is a huge thing to be surrounded by people like that. You know, it actually, I don't know, and it's funny. It means that when you go off and try doing these things, you know, it never feels like a risk, right? It's just something you do, right? To go give it a go. So yeah, no, I've been very lucky to be surrounded by people like that.
Well, that whole idea of what's the worst that can happen type of thing as you start something new, it doesn't have to be a big deal. You can't, you know, people look at things in different levels of risk, and you know, for some people, starting a business is a really big risk. But for other people, and I looked at it this way, even just starting my own business, you know, if it doesn't work, you just go get a job.
Yeah,
it's not, you know, it's not the worst thing in the world, right? I mean, I remember like old Italian aunties, like when we'd move from, you know, Geraldton to Perth and then to Sydney, they'd say, you know, we were pretty young at the time when my wife and I moved, and she said, well, what if it doesn't work? And I just said, well, we'll just drive back.
Yeah.
And to me, it was so obvious and logical that it didn't matter. But to other people, sometimes it's a massive restraint because of the fear of what it might mean. So seeing other people do that, and I look at those lessons, and now I see my kids growing up and moving overseas and doing different things, and it's like they learn from that because they see you do things.
Yeah. No, definitely. No, it's yeah, it's funny. Like, I think, you know, I had, you know, my eldest was born about 18 months into starting this, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And people are like, why are you starting a business, having a kid? Like, what? I mean, what else am I going to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just what you do, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It never really kind of entered my mind, you know, from a risk perspective, right?
No, it's just different people's perspective on it. It's not necessarily, there's no right or wrong. It's just how different people see things. But often those things get perpetuated. And like you say, getting back to, you know, sort of the people that you've seen succeed in business and do things, it just becomes much easier to have a go yourself when you see other people have done it.
Yeah.
It's not a stretch.
Yeah, definitely. And look, it'd be the same, you know, if you grew up in a family of skydivers, right? And you just go skydiving, and like that's just what you do, right? Whereas, you know, I've done it once. That was enough, right?
Yeah, that's a good example. I'm never doing that, and no one in my family's ever done it. So you're proving the point.
Yeah.
Okay, what about business books? Do you read much in terms of business books and that type of thing? Is there anything you could recommend for listeners around favorite business book?
Yeah, it's really funny. When I first started Instaclustr, like I bought all these books and like I read them, and you'd read them and you'd be like, oh, I understand the lesson like at an intellectual level, but I never really internalized it. And then there was a few books that I went and reread about 5 years into this journey, and oh my goodness, they spoke to me like on a way different level because I'd gone through the pain before, and I could really relate it to everything we were doing. And then when I read about, what's the next stage, you got like, I don't know, just that lesson was so much more concrete than when I, was just starting out. I read them. And so I think probably like two of my favorite books, I think a lot of people talk about this one, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. Awesome book.
Great book.
If you're doing anything in tech, definitely go read it. But I think it's pretty applicable to a lot of other
any
businesses
business.
too.
Right? Any business, I think.
And then probably one that's less business and more around like management and organizational stuff is Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette. Super interesting book. Essentially, this guy for the US Navy worked on nuclear submarines. He got assigned to I think they call them boats or subs or whatever they call them. It was the sub with like the lowest morale. They were, constantly stuff was under repaired. They never left dry dock. Morale was terrible. It had a terrible reputation. And, he kind of came in with a very traditional management approach at the time for the US Navy. But then working with one of his mentors, he started to do all these things about pushing responsibility down, right? So, the people that are directly responsible for the systems, pushing responsibility, accountability, but also the ability to have some executive decision over it. And he did that in a nuclear submarine where safety systems are critical. Right? And so it's a really, really amazing, management and leadership book around how you can really empower people, even in very, critical situations where people need to be highly skilled. They need to be worried about nuclear meltdowns and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I guess they're incentivized, right? Because they're on there. Doesn't matter what level you're at, you're still incentivized to keep it safe because your life's on that sub.
It is. But so in the space of about 2 years, he kind of turned it around to be the highest performing boat. His the promotion rate amongst staff in that boat, like outside of the Navy, like outside once they moved on in their career, was like 97% or something. Like it was absolutely insane what this guy did. Really, really inspiring story. So, they're probably like two, one good business book. Lean Startup, I think that's got to be, mandatory reading.
A foundation one, What's the second one, Ben? What's it called? I haven't heard of it.
Turn the Ship Around.
Turn the Ship Around.
A true story of turning followers into leaders. I'll send you the link so you can put it in the podcast description, but thoroughly recommend this one.
Okay, excellent. And in terms of, just to finish up, any sort of a quote or motto or anything from in life that you live by, or that is that resonates with you or resonated with you as you were going along? That's a tricky question. So if there's not,
it is. Look, I've got a few, but I think, and you could probably apply this to a number of different things. But I heard this saying about quality, right? And quality is not an attribute; it's a process, right? And that's spoken to me, but not just about quality as a concept, but about so many things.
I like that. I haven't heard that before. That's good.
Everything's a process, right? So one, it allows you to make mistakes, right? But you learn from those mistakes, you iterate on those, and that's how you improve quality, right? But that's also how you get better at everything, right? So as soon as you start viewing everything as a process, I don't know. I feel like it frees me to make mistakes, to give it a go, and to get better at things.
Well, it changes your perspective instantly from it being a thing to being a way of being.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Which I think that's pretty profound, to think of things along that line.
If you follow the lean startup approach of like building an MVP, which can be quite minimal. It also helps you feel comfortable with the fact that you've built something quite small, and it's like, look, no, this is a process. We're going to iterate on this. We're going to get better. It's going to, solve more problems and other bits and pieces.
Yeah. And even that thinking, and I know there's been other things, I guess, built on top of that since in the last sort of 10, 15 years, whatever it might be. But even that way of thinking was quite revolutionary at the time, because up until then, people were not comfortable with doing anything but the finished product, and
Mhm.
you'd sort of spend all that time getting something that wasn't actually right, missed the
Yep.
point, but it was perfect,
Yeah, yeah,
which is kind of pointless, right?
yeah.
And that's not, you could have something that's really good quality, but if it was impractical or not commercial or whatever it might be, what was the point?
Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, that's good. That's about it, Ben. Thanks very much for your time.
Hey, no worries. Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great hearing your insights and learning about your journey, and best of luck with the future employment.
Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to it. My first real job in 10 years.